Okay, I think we're going to start in chapter 3 of Isaiah. Okay, last week we did chapter 2, which is a wonderful chapter about the day of the Lord, and it combines both the tribulation and the millennium. And so that's why when we deal with the subject of the day of the Lord, we have to put those two together. Now, we use the expression the day of the Lord to talk just about the millennium, and that's okay. But we also know that it covers both that whole period of time, from the time the Lord initiates his judgment and when the abomination is set up and the tribulation comes until the end of the millennium, Christ's 1,000-year reign. Okay, that's all the day of the Lord. And nowhere is it clearer than in chapter 2 of Isaiah, but it's also in other places. We saw it in Amos, remember? Not Amos, Micah, last time we read it in Micah, chapter 5. And we see it in several passages in Isaiah. I'm going to point it out to you as we go through. But we did that all in eschatology, right? Went through all those verses on the screen for you. But now we're actually reading them in their context. Okay, so he jumps from that then back to the situation at hand, the judgment that's coming on the nation. And sometimes, and this is something I keep saying to you, but it's an important point, is that sometimes they seem to run together. And that's because the prophets are looking into the future. And it's all, even the immediate things that happen are hundreds of years away. So from their perspective, it's all, in the distant future. And sometimes they run together, like Jesus' first coming and his second coming appear together, like it's all going to happen, one thing after the other. And that's because from God's perspective, that's his plan, that's what he's doing. Understand? So the end of the age and the time period when the prophecies are given are connected. Everything in between is just, it's just part of the plan. You follow? So God lays out his plans for Israel and his goals, but in the meantime they have to go through this exile from their land and so on. But it all then points to the Messiah's ministry and the restoration that he brings. And so really for the last 2,000 years we've been in the Messiah's ministry. We've been in what the Bible calls the last days.
Yeah.
Okay? And then we're in the end of the last days right now. We're in the end of the age. But from the time of Messiah's coming, he began this wrapping this thing up, so to speak. And the time has been extended because of God's grace in bringing in Gentile nations, giving them an opportunity to come into the kingdom.
Amen.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So people need to realize that this is not just, God isn't just following the circumstances and just kind of going with the flow, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
God's plan is being worked all the time, and it's clearly laid out here, and that we're now in the end stages of it. Mm-hmm. So when you keep that in mind, then it makes sense. But otherwise, you'll just be jerking you back and forth, and you're trying to understand what is it. Is that about then? Is that about now? What is that about? Yeah. But nowhere does it come out clearer than in the messianic prophecies, because we know that the first coming and the second coming have a big gap of time in between. But when the prophecies are given, it doesn't say that, right? So how do we know the difference? Well, we look to the events. We should know all this stuff because we're looking back at it all. It's not future. Only thing that's future now is the end of it. Amen? But you can understand those first century Jews, they expected Jesus to fulfill the day of the Lord and do all that. That's what they were expecting.
Right.
And now we understand why they were expecting that. Mm-hmm. But they missed the part that, of course, they didn't want to hear. The suffering part. Who wants to hear that? And we're in the same place again. I think Christians are in danger of missing that part. They don't want to hear the tribulation, all that stuff. don't want to hear about what the stuff coming. They just want the kingdom, right? So it's the same kind of deception, really. You can easily just kind of make it say what you want. Because you want it so bad, you start seeing it everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, let's go on. But I hope that helps. But I point that out only to keep that in mind so you can understand from God's perspective and from the prophet's perspective. It's all future and it's all part of the Messiah's ministry. Okay, chapter 3. He seems to go back to the current situation. For behold, the Lord God of hosts is going to remove from Jerusalem and Judah both supply and support, the whole supply of bread, the whole supply of water. You're sure we didn't read this last time, right? Maybe I just read it. That's what I thought.
I'm not sure yet.
The mighty man, and the warrior, the judge, and the prophet, the diviner, and the elder, the captain of 50, and the honorable man, the counselor, and the expert artisan, and the skillful enchanter, and I will make mere lads their princes, and capricious children will rule over them, and the people will be oppressed. Okay? So the point he's making now is that, again, when God lifts his hands, the supplies, God supports us. He gives us everything we have. Everything we get comes from the Lord, right? And people think, oh, it's just a natural thing. But it really isn't. If God takes his hand off it, the curse comes. Things don't, the land doesn't produce, the crops aren't good and all that, right? And the same is true for, he's saying that the counselor and the expert artisan, right? The lack of leadership, lack of government, inability to govern oneself, lack of wisdom. All those things are a result of God removing his blessing. And we see that happening in our own country. Our lack of leadership is a direct result of our sinfulness. Right? We're losing the ability. It's not just on the federal level. It's everywhere. It's the local governments. Nobody can govern with righteousness anymore. Nobody can we're looking at problems that can't be resolved.
Not even parents.
Not even the family, right? So the authority has just collapsed, right? And that's because when you reject God, you reject the one who supports all that. So then you kind of lose the foundation. You undermine the very foundation of all those things. And so he's saying you're going to have leaders that are like children. They just don't know what to do. They're just kids. Anyway, and the people will be oppressed. So oppression it comes as a result of God lifting his blessing. So in that sense, how can anyone say that America is not a judgment? Because we've gone from a place of tremendous blessing to good years, good times, right? To a place where we can't govern ourselves, where we're losing all of our freedoms, where we're now being oppressed. And there's nothing perhaps more oppressive than taxes.
Yes.
And it's surprising to most people to know that there was no taxation, there was no income tax until 1913. Before that, there was people didn't pay income tax.
Yeah, it's still not constitutional.
It's still not. No, we could go there.
I'm sorry. I know this.
We'll try to avoid that rabbit. Okay, but the point is, taxes are. People want to know why are we against raising taxes? Because taxes are oppressive, and they always oppress the poor. And they say they're not going to, but they do.
Right.
And their idea of poor nowadays is people who have nothing, like, destitute. And of course they're poor, but they provide some kind of help for them. They provide, it never gets them out of poverty, but it keeps them in it, so to speak. But it's enough to eat and be alive, right? And, get health care or whatever it is you get. But the people who are trying to work, there's no help for them at all. So they don't get anything. Right? So they're the ones being oppressed, is the people in the middle.
Right.
And it's always that way. So what we see going on is this great divide between the wealthy and the poor. that's a result of oppression. Now, I'm not, again, necessarily applying, this to America, but you can see the principle operating. That when God removes his blessing, this is what comes. So people expect judgment to be, some kind of catastrophe. Well, I think we're seeing those now, aren't we? A couple of months later, we've had the second largest terrorist event second one in the country since 9/11 being the first. This is the largest terrorist event since. Right?
Yeah.
So all those people saying nothing is happening, they need to wake up, don't they?
Yeah.
But judgment has already come in a lot of ways. And so there's two ways that God brings judgment: by direct punishment, direct judgment, where the people are exiled, some catastrophe, some natural disaster, or whatever, right? But the other way is for God to lift his hand and leave you on your own. And you realize then, boy, I really need God.
Yeah.
And so that's what's going to happen to the proud and arrogant. God's going to lift his hand off of them, eventually judge them. But the first one always comes with God removing his blessing. And that's done to get our attention. Because God doesn't want to bring the next one.
Right.
But if you don't get the first one, then comes the head on, so to speak. Right? So Israel is just not listening, and God's heart is grieved. And so he's saying the result is going to be oppression. People are going to be oppressed, and your rulers are going to be foolish and fools and so on. Because we need God's wisdom in order to do anything, don't we? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Each one by another, and each one by his neighbor. The youth will storm against the elder, and the inferior against the honorable. We did go through this last time, because I remember talking about the members of your household. Did we go through that? I think we did, but anyway, it's okay. We're doing it again. When a man lays hold of his brother in his father's house, saying, "You have a cloak, you shall be our ruler, and these ruins will be under your charge," on that day we will protest, saying, "I will not be your healer." Binder of wounds, literally. "For in my house there is neither bread nor cloak. You should not appoint me ruler of the people." So again, we see the people just don't want to take the responsibility. They don't want to serve. They don't want to give, right? They don't want to lead. Because such a time has come when it's not fashionable. The youth are challenging the older people and the elders, and this again is what we see in our society. So I'm just using it as an example to illustrate this is what we see going on again. All that stuff. When we leave God out of the picture, that's what happens. Authority, people who have problems with authority have problems with God. They say they don't, but they do. Because all authority comes from God. Right? And people abuse authority, sure they do, but that does not mean that we can have an attitude toward it. Amen? We can disagree, we can within our system, we can operate and give our viewpoint and offer our, our input, so to speak. We have that ability to do that in these Western countries. We're supposed to anyway, right?
Yeah.
So that's a privilege that we have.
Right.
But so we do have a placed avenue to work, but the reality is that things are getting worse and worse because God has been left out of the picture. Okay, verse 8, "For Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah has fallen, because their speech and their actions are against the Lord, to rebel against his glorious presence." And you see how, they're not just coming out against God. They're talking about God. They claim to love God. They worship and all this stuff. But what they're doing is against God, and he considers them against him. And that's really an important point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you can say all the right words, but you can have the Christianese and all that. But if you don't walk it out, show love, and be like Christ, then you're really on the wrong side of the thing. It's actually worse that you have the language and not have the fruit. right? Because that actually offends God. You're claiming to represent Him, but you're actually hurting Him. Okay, and a lot of that going on, isn't there? The expression of their faces bears witness against them, and they display their sin like Sodom. They do not even conceal it. Woe to them, for they have brought evil on themselves. Say to the righteous that it will go well with them, for they will eat the fruit of their actions. Woe to the wicked, it will go badly with them, for what he deserves will be done to him. O my people, their oppressors are children, and women rule over them. O my people, those who guide you lead you astray and confuse the direction of your paths. Now, I just want to say that today, of course, that wouldn't be such a problem that women rule over us. Okay, a woman in leadership wouldn't be such a big deal. But in those days, you have to again consider the culture. They weren't trained, weren't educated, didn't know a lot because they weren't trained or educated. That doesn't mean they didn't know Torah. They all were trained in Torah, right? But in that culture, that was something that would have been, really bad for them, at least in their perspective. I'm not saying that it's the same today, okay? And just because it's here doesn't mean God thinks, to have a woman in leadership would be bad.
Well, it's we all know it's bigger than that.
It's bigger than that, yes.
These women trying to replace the roles of men.
Yes, it's a role thing, yes. And now there were some leaders, obviously, Deborah being one, Huldah being another, that were anointed and blessed by God. But notice they didn't abandon their roles.
Right.
That's something people need to remember. They were both mothers.
Amen.
And so their leadership was actually like a mother in Israel. They were of great stature.
Yeah.
And in a culture where women and men were separated when they worshipped, that was an incredible honor. When you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Huldah was so honored by the Jews that one of the gates, the southern gates into the temple, were called the Huldah gates. They honored her by naming the gates after her. Right? So she was a contemporary of Jeremiah. She didn't write any books, but she was a prophetess and quite a powerful lady. So I just wanted to make that point. Okay. But in this culture, though, that would be completely out of step. And that's the point. It just wouldn't work. So those who guide you lead you astray and confuse the direction of your path. So the leadership is corrupt, and that's a sign of judgment, right? The Lord arises to contend. It's not that God is doing it to them. They're doing it to themselves by rejecting God, by not loving God. God is taking His blessing away from them, which He has every right to do. The Lord arises to contend and stands to judge the people. The Lord enters into judgment with the elders and princes of His people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The plunder of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the face of the poor, declares the Lord? See, that's not something, and here's probably where I would break with some of my, I'm going to use a term here, conservative friends. Obviously, as Christians are conservatives. What that means is we support family values, biblical values, moral values. That makes us conservatives, right?
Yeah.
Because we support biblical values. In our culture, liberal means that you don't care about those values. They're whatever people want to do, they do. That's what the liberal philosophy is, right? Except it's changing to whoever wants these values is the problem. That's another whole thing. But anyway, I'm not sure where I was going with that. Oh yeah, the conservative thing. This is where I find neither side really has a care for the poor. The one side, will say that they have all the programs and everything for the poor, but they don't really care for the poor. That's just to keep the base. That's just to keep the votes coming.
Right.
They're not doing anything really for the poor. That she's keeping them alive. And they're giving them, they give the stuff, all right, but they're not able to rise above it. I mean, look at our cities. Look at the stuff that's going on in our inner cities because people are living in such, and it's not just poverty. Obviously, the breakdown of the family, the whole deal, right? But what I'm saying is I find a lot of conservatives to be completely out of touch with this issue, that we do need to care for the poor, right?
Yeah.
And that they believe in it, but they don't, we need to do it. And so my philosophy is we need to help people to get a job and to work, and that's what we should be doing. So neither side is really caring for the poor. That's my opinion. And I think it's right because it's the evidence, what we see.
Yeah.
The poor don't get any better off. Really, do they? And so we all have to say, yeah, that's not happening. And everybody says they're going to do it, but they don't do it. And that's not accidental. And then you look at the world situation, look at the third world countries, they don't get any better. And yet they throw millions and millions of dollars people give to causes, and it never goes to the people who need it. Right? It never helps them. So, why am I saying all this? Well, I'm saying this not to get off of the topic, but to say that it's important that we understand that's high on God's priority list, and He keeps mentioning it over and over again, how they treat the poor people, how they treat ordinary folks. Right? And when people get into riches and get into power and all that, they become elitist, and they think they're better than everybody else, and they think the poor just need to just suck it up, kind of thing. Right?
Yeah.
Go get a job or whatever. Well, there aren't any jobs for them, so what are they supposed to do then?
Yeah, that's what Republicans used to be.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to use that word.
Oh,
But
sorry. It wasn't PJ. But that's changed too, the definition of that.
yeah, so I don't, that's one place where I would break with conservatives. I would say, I agree with everything else, but that does not mean that I would agree with the other side, because they're just hypocrites. They're giving lip service to something just to keep their base in check so they can get their votes.
Yeah, they keep
But
changing.
you'll just look at our inner cities and say they're not doing nothing to help people. Somebody gets a job and they make $2 more than everybody else, and boom, they lose all their benefits. Won't get any benefits now because you got a job, right?
Right.
So that's not helping the poor. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
You want to help the poor people, give them the money so that they can keep their apartment, so they can get to the place in their job where they can actually take care of themselves, and then you can stop the benefits.
Right.
But the whole goal should be to get them on their feet and help them up, right? It's supposed to be a hand up, but it's kind of more like a hand keeping you down.
Yeah.
And anyone who's gone through it knows that. And I see that, I've seen that as a pastor for years, that people try to get off welfare and stuff, and they can't.
Right.
What are you going to do? Now you can't afford an apartment on what people pay you, so what are you supposed to do? Say, oh, well, you got to go to school, you got to go to, yeah, right. What does that cost?
Right.
And then you come out of all that and there's no jobs.
Yeah.
So we need to sound that alarm. We really do. If people want to talk about being Christians and caring for, doing all this stuff, well, you can't abandon the poor. And God really feels, so it's big on His list. That's why we feel strong about that if there's a need, that we should do something if it's a genuine need. Now, of course, there are people who like to, take advantage of that kind of stuff. So we're not the welfare department. We don't. And a lot of people think that that's what the church lives for, is to just take care of poor people and do soup kitchens and all that. That's the only, that's the role of the church. Well, not necessarily. Our job is to make sure that we take care of the poor among us. That's actually more biblical. I'm not saying that we shouldn't care for the poor out there, but the church should make sure that we take care of our own who are struggling. And that's not always easy to do. Okay, so that's one of the reasons we established a benevolent account here. There's always something in there if somebody has a need, right? But we're very careful in how we give it out. It has to be a genuine need. We don't just give it to people who are just kind of going to blow it on something. right? So with God's grace, we don't want, in the early church said there was nobody among them that had need. And that's really the way it should be. But that teaching and all that goes with that. You can't just give people money, because that doesn't solve the problem. You have to help them to overcome whatever it is they're going through, whether it's addictions or whether they have to come to a place where they're responsible and all that. So that's part of the training. Anyway, whatever it is, they weren't doing it, and we're not doing it today either.
Right.
Amen?
Amen.
But anyway, you see how God says, what do you mean by crushing my people? How dare you? It's like God gets really angry with this issue, especially widows and orphans.
Yeah.
The early church took care of all of its widows, because in that culture, without a widow was abandoned. She didn't have a family to take care of her. She was lost, because there was no role for her. Right? Today, of course, she could go get a job or something. She couldn't really do that back then. It was an agricultural society, and the men really were in charge, right? And if she wasn't married to somebody, she had no real role, right? And so it was critical for them to take care of the poor. And you know that they were feeding thousands of widows. And they were so careful to obey the scriptures. And even when Paul went to meet with the apostles in Jerusalem, he said that the only thing they cared about was that wherever I went, that we look out for the poor. Right? So it's amazing. That was top on their list as well. But not the humanitarianism that we see today. That's not the same. You follow the difference? It's not the same as that's not necessarily Christianity being humanitarian. That's just being humanitarian. Anybody can be. It's not bad. It's good, but there are a lot of people who do that to try to impress God. But doesn't impress Him. It impresses Him when we obey Him.
Right.
Amen?
Amen.
Moreover, the Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are proud and walk with heads held high, and seductive eyes, and go along with mincing steps, and tingle the bangles on their feet, therefore the Lord will afflict the scalp of the daughters of Zion with scabs, and the Lord will make their foreheads bare. In that day, the Lord will take away the beauty of their anklets, headbands, and crescent ornaments, dangling earrings, bracelets, veils, headdresses, ankle chains, sashes. Well, they had a lot of stuff on them back then, didn't they? Perfume boxes, amulets, finger rings, nose rings. People think they just came up with that today. Festal robes, outer tunics, cloaks, and money purses, hand mirrors, undergarments, turbans, and veils. Wow. So they were just all decked out with all this stuff, and God is saying, when the oppressor comes, when the exile comes, you're going to lose all that stuff, and your heads are going to be shaved, right? Now it will come about that instead of sweet perfume, there will be putrefaction. Doesn't sound too good, does it? Instead of well-set hair, a plucked-out scalp. Instead of fine clothes, a donning of sackcloth. And branding instead of beauty. Your men will fall by the sword, and your mighty ones in battle, and her gates will lament and mourn, and deserted she will sit on the ground. That's Jerusalem. Okay? So that's a prophecy to Jerusalem. And again, it doesn't mean that every single woman is going to go through this, and every single man. The point is destruction is coming. Exile is coming, and this is what it looks like, and all those things are not going to be very important then. Right? And it says, for 7 women will take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes, only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach. Okay? I think that this verses 1 to 3 are actually a continuation of the previous verses. Remember, the chapters and verses were put in by translators in an attempt to give us a place to look, right? So we know what chapter and verse we're using. But they're not always in the appropriate places per the text, because it all really flows together sometimes, and there's no place to break it, so they chose to break it where they thought it was breaking, right? But I think this is just a continuation of the previous verses, where the exile and the men are being killed by the sword, and the women are going through all this stuff, and they're all going into exile, and Jerusalem is destroyed and deserted. She sits on the ground, right? That says 7 women will take hold of one man that day. Now some have tried to connect this with other verses that's in the future, but this one may just simply apply to that time. You follow me? Just take away our reproach. So again, notice that a woman needed a man in those days to have her, to be cared for. And take away my reproach, my shame, give me a good life again.
Yeah.
You know?
They didn't want to be widows. They
don't want to be left, to be abandoned. Right. Now, it does jump, though, into, here's one of those places where it jumps to the future. So that's why some have tied these verses to the future, to the millennial period. Okay? I'm not inclined to think that. I think it's just a continuation of the previous verses, but that would be okay. It's figurative language anyway. It's not necessarily speaking literal. It's just giving a picture of what it's going to be like. Okay? It doesn't mean that 7 women actually come up to one guy. You follow? It's just a way of speaking. Okay. In that day, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth will be the pride and adornment of the survivors of Israel. Now he has jumped into the future. But of course, it applies to the coming judgment as well, in that God will bring survivors. Agreed?
Yeah.
There'll be a remnant. But it jumps into the future because it talks about the branch. And notice in your translations, it's a capital B. Okay? That's because the branch is the Lord, is the Messiah. The branch is a picture of it's a word for the Messiah. It's used over and over again in Isaiah, different places. I have a little picture in your notes there showing the branch. You see it? It's on page 29. The branch, okay? And the meaning is that the Messiah is the branch that's coming out. Israel is a stump that's been crushed and been destroyed, but the branch is the remnant, and the Messiah specifically that comes out of it and grows again. Right? Follow the language? That's the point. You look at it, it looks dead, but all of a sudden a branch shoots out. And so the Messiah is the branch, and he's going to, it says, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth will be the pride and adornment of the survivors of Israel. In contrast to the previous destruction where their adornment is destroyed and they have shame, it says when the Messiah will bring them to a place of the survivors, the remnant of Israel, the Messiah will make them again glorious, right? And their adornment will be glorious. You follow?
Yeah.
And of course, he's jumped now to the millennium. So he's connected the Messiah and the millennium because that's his ministry. So Jesus began his ministry and he didn't finish it yet. We have a role to play, and then he's going to come back in the last 3.5 years and finish it and bring us into the millennium when all these promises are fulfilled. Right? And the remnant will just escape. There will be a remnant that will survive. And Isaiah says a lot about the remnant and a lot about those days. It will come about that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, and everyone who is recorded for life in Jerusalem. He is in the day of the Lord now. You see that? When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the bloodshed of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and the spirit of burning. Now, we know that's future because it hasn't happened. Agreed? That's how we know it's future. Because first of all, the Messiah does it. That's not what happened when Messiah came the first time. So this is his second coming. Right? And it's all one period of time here. But because time is not mentioned. Time is up to us to ascertain. It's not mentioned. It's all part of his ministry. And so the bloodshed is washed away. This is another place, chapter 4, where the day of the Lord, tribulation, and the millennium appear together as one unit. That's how we know they're one and the same. You follow?
Yep.
Because first there's the purging, which is the tribulation period. And then there's the adornment of the survivors. Then the Lord will create over the whole area of Mount Zion and over her assemblies a cloud by day and even smoke and the brightness of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory will be a canopy. So we go from the judgment and the burning, which is the tribulation period. It's a day of fire, right? To the burning. From the burning to the glory over everybody. Right? Hello? You out there?
Yep.
And there will be a shelter to give shade from the heat by day and refuge and protection from the storm and the rain. So again, it doesn't mean that a big umbrella jumps up and, that's not the point. Again, it's a picture of God. None of the harsh conditions are not going to affect it's not going to be like that anymore. Even the weather's going to be nice. Okay? So remember, not everything, we take the Bible literally, but that doesn't mean that every verse, when it's using figurative language, we have to know the difference, that it's not necessarily literal. Like 7 women taking home one guy. He's just giving us a figurative figure of speech that it's like that. That's how desperate they'll be, right?
Right.
So we can discern when it's actually a literal thing that's going to happen, literally, and when it's just telling us the way it's going to be, and that's a type of such and such, or a expressive way to say it, right? As you can see, the prophets are very expressive and emotive in the way they speak. And sometimes, and this is hard for people to understand because they think I'm somehow undermining them, but I'm not. Sometimes they exaggerate on purpose. Okay? That's part of the way of expressing themselves. That was the ancient Hebrews were like that. They were dramatic. The whole earth is going to be destroyed. Right? And so we take that literally, meaning that the earth is going to be gone, destroyed, finished. But no, we find out from the rest of the passages that it's going to be restored. Right?
Yeah.
So you have to see that that's an overly dramatic. I believe the same is true of other passages that Gentiles are misinterpreting because they come at it from a Gentile perspective. See, we wouldn't say that. We'd say, 60% of the earth is going to be like, washed up in terrible shape. The rest is going to be struggling a bit. It's going to be bad too. But there will be a few places that are habitable. That's how we would say it.
Right.
Right.
But the prophets say, the earth is going to be ruined. Right?
Yeah.
And both are true. It's just a dramatic approach. I think the same is true, and this one might shake you a bit, but I think the same is true when he says, when David is quoted, Paul quotes David, he says, there is none righteous, not even one, right? There's none, and see, that is the same kind of picture. And, David was righteous.
Mm-hmm.
You follow?
Yeah.
There were some righteous people alive at the time, but by and large, people were not righteous. People were not nobody does good. So it seems like there's absolutely nobody. I know, folks, we tend to come out there and say, that means there was never anybody righteous. It's just not true. But that's how we come at it, right? So, of course, the truth is that, there's works we can't be saved by works and all that. So it's often used to explain that, which is fine, but it's a dramatic way that people speak. There have always been righteous people. Not many, but a few. Look at Cornelius, remember him? The Lord said he was a righteous man. Look at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Look at David, look at all of the prophets. The prophet who's speaking is righteous. Amen?
Yeah.
Walking with God. So it's a dramatic statement and it's a general statement. And we have to be careful to notice the difference between the two. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, but for the most part, it's true. There is none who does good. Everybody kind of does their own thing. That's certainly true today, isn't it? None who seeks for God. Well, that one may very well be true. But then again, there are a few, thank God, who are looking for Him. Okay. Where are we? Verse 5. Chapter 5. Sorry, we're going awfully slow here. We should be going faster. Let me sing now for my well-beloved, a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. Now, this is a beautiful chapter here, and this is one that Jesus picks up on a couple of times, actually. It appears in a couple of the Gospels, and it's really important. And he dug it all. My beloved, my well-beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it all around, removed its stones, and planted it with choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it, and he hewed out a vine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good grapes, but it produced only worthless ones. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why, when I expected it to produce good grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So now let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. Okay, and you know the rest of the story, right? I will remove its hedge, and it will be consumed. I will break down its wall, and it will become trampled ground. And I will lay it waste, and it will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. And I will also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the man of Judah his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, and behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold a cry of distress. Okay? So this, my beloved, of course, is the Lord, right? The beloved is the Lord. He had a vineyard. Israel is his vineyard. And he, he gives us this story, this parable. It's a parable. Jesus taught in parables, but he wasn't the first to teach in parables. A lot of scriptures are in parables. This is a parable, which Jesus actually picks up and shares it again, because they were fully aware of it. They knew this scripture, right? The reference would be, what chapter? It's Matthew 21. You want to go there for a minute? Just keep your finger where it is in Isaiah. Matthew 21. Jesus uses this parable, but then adds a few more verses to it. Verse 33. Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard and put a wall around it and dug a winepress in it and built a tower. Now, some of you, if you have some of the better Bibles will have that in the NAS often has it in any quote from the Old Testament will appear in block capitals. You have that? Yeah. If you see that, that means it's a quote from the Old Testament. In this case, Isaiah. And he built a tower and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey. Now, this was a beautiful vineyard, all the right stuff. He did all the right things for it, right? But it doesn't produce anything, but sour grapes. And this is a picture of Israel. God did everything for them, but they produced nothing but sour grapes. And when the harvest time approached, he sent his slaves to the vine growers to receive his produce. And the vine growers took his slaves and beat one, killed the other, and stoned the third. And he sent another group of slaves larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. But afterward he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir, come, let us kill him and seize the inheritance. And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. He's prophesying about himself here. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine growers? Right? So he's using the same parable, which was well known to them, to tell them that the same thing was happening again. He was looking for fruit, and there's no fruit. And what's God going to do? He's going to destroy the vineyard. Because while it's taking up space, it's not doing anything. And we would all do the same. Can't get any good grapes there. We're going to start somewhere else. Right? Anyway. Where were we? Verse... all the way down. We finished, didn't we? Verse 8. Woe to those who add house to house and join field to field. That's like taking other people's property, right? They just can't get enough. They always have to have more. Greedy and selfish, right? Till there was no more room. So that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. In my ears the Lord of hosts has sworn, surely many houses shall become desolate, even great and fine ones without occupants. For 10 acres of vineyard will yield only 1 bath of wine, and a homer of seed will yield but an ephah of flour. There's the lack of blessing again, right? Woe to those who rise early in the morning, that they may pursue strong drink, who stay up late in the evening, that wine may inflame them, and their banquets are accompanied by lyre and harp, by tambourine and flute, and by wine, but they do not pay attention to the deeds of the Lord, nor do they consider the work of his hands. So they're having a great time feasting and partying and all the rest of it, but they don't care about the Lord, right? They give no attention to the Lord, and he's saying, what's going to happen is all of your fruit is going to waste away. There's not going to be anything left. Of course, again, he's talking about the exile that's coming and the destruction that's coming. Therefore, my people go into exile for their lack of knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude is parched with thirst. Now, it's knowledge of the Lord, okay? It's not knowing stuff that matters, it's knowing the Lord. You all know the difference, right? It's not knowing stuff about God even, which is good. But it's knowing him personally. It's knowing him, knowing his heart, knowing how he thinks, knowing how he feels. That's knowing him. You know, you can't know God unless you know his feelings. That may sound strange to some people, but if you know the Lord, you got to know how he feels. You don't have to. If he's working in you and you're getting to know him, the Bible is working in you too, and it's in you, right? So you start feeling the way the Lord feels. You know how the Lord feels because you feel that way. Amen. You can feel his heart and know how he feels. Is it cold in here? Is that why you're putting your coat on?
Yeah, I'm chilling.
You crank it up a little bit. And thanks. We don't want anybody cold. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's an important point, isn't it? It's knowledge of God. They're going into exile because they don't know God. They've strayed away from him and they don't know anything anymore. So without God, we don't know anything. People think they're smart, but they're not. And their multitude is parched with thirst. Therefore Sheol has enlarged its throat and opened its mouth without measure. Sheol, of course, is the underworld. At Jerusalem, or where people go when they die, is Hades. Sheol in the Hebrew, Hades in the Greek. And Jerusalem's splendor, her multitude, her din of revelry, and the jubilant within her descended into it, that's Sheol. So the common man will be humbled, and the man of importance abased. The eyes of the proud will also be abased, but the Lord of hosts will be exalted in judgment, and the holy God will show himself holy in righteousness. Then the lambs will graze as in their pasture, and strangers will eat in the waste places of the wealthy. Woe to those who drag iniquity with the cords of falsehood, and sin as if with cart ropes, who say, let him make speed, let him hasten his work, that we may see it. And let the purpose of the Holy One of Israel draw near, and come to pass, that we may know it. Woe to those who call evil good, and good evil, who substitute darkness for light, and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. Right? Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. This is what happens when people get prideful and get so full of themselves and they start making their own rules. That's what happened. The people just, they now have decided that they're going to choose what's good and what's evil. Right? So when we don't have the knowledge of God, this is what happens to us. And that's what's happened to our culture. Now, 50 years ago, you didn't have to tell people what was good and evil.
Right.
But now you do. People don't know. Right? Yeah. Well, they think that evil is good now. And they think, And so we see this in front of our eyes, don't we? And it's proof, of course, that we're at the end of the age. And it's also proof that judgment is coming. Yeah. If God doesn't judge us, Gentiles, for what way we live, then he's going to have to apologize to these people. Okay? Because the same rules apply to us too. And we're seeing all those things happening before us. And it's a sign of how sin has kind of run its course. It's gone to the, you've gone to the, come to maturity. Because you're now calling good evil and evil good. That's a sign you've already come to the place where you're now becoming evil yourself. You've become evil yourself.
Yeah.
You don't know the difference anymore. Okay. Woe to those who are heroes in drinking wine. Heroes. Imagine that. And valiant men in mixing strong drink. So that's become their absolute, I guess.
Crown of glory.
What?
That's their crown of glory.
Yeah. And take away the rights of the ones who are right, who are in the right. Okay? And again, it's not necessarily the fact that the wine is not the issue here, it's what they're doing with it. Okay? Some people think that the Bible, says that you can't drink, but it doesn't say that anywhere. In fact, it's all talking about wine. Why did he make a vineyard? Why did he even use that illustration if God is against it? No, it's just the way they're abusing him and abusing each other and abusing wine. Okay, because that's all they live for now.
It's their idol.
It's their idol, yeah. Just having a good time, partying. Where was I? Verse 23? Who justify the wicked for a bribe. Oh boy. Does this one fit in today, huh? And take away the rights of the ones who are in the right. That's always been the case, of course, throughout history. This has always been the issue, right? But we can see this so clearly today because this is how our system is now working. This is a real sign of how we're deteriorating as a nation. You go to places, I won't mention names, and you go to some places, where you have to bribe people in order to get anything. Yeah. But it's getting like that around here. It's getting like that in this country. They used to say it's who you know,
It's not who you
Yeah,
are.
it's who you know, right? That implies that, they're going to do something for you, You scratch their back and they'll scratch yours, as they say, right?
Yeah.
But this is a huge problem in our nation. In Washington, it's so corrupt with money, bribing, and lobbyists and all that going on all the time. People making decisions because they got bribed, they got money. Or shutting their mouths because they were given money. Right? Mm-hmm. Not opposing bills because they were given money. As being bought, as they say. Take away the rights of the ones who are in the right. Now God sees it, The person is trying to get justice and a judge or somebody is bought off. Right? That's what's going on here. They ignore it. They choose not to see when evil is done because somebody gave them money. And so the person who's been oppressed has to put up with it on their own. Therefore, as a tongue of fire consumes stubble and dry grass collapses into the flame, so their root will become like rot and their blossom blow away as dust, for they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. On this account, the anger of the Lord has burned against his people, and he has stretched out his hand against them and struck them down. And the mountains quaked, and their tongues lay like refuse in the middle of the streets. For all this, his anger is not spent, his hand is still stretched out. He will also lift up a standard to the distant nation, and will whistle for it, and from the ends of the earth, and behold, it will come with speed, swiftly. This is, of course, the Babylonians here, in this case, right? So we're talking about Judah. No one in it is weary or stumbles, none slumbers or sleeps, nor is the belt at his waist undone, nor its sandal straps broken. Its arrows are sharp, and all of its bows are bent, meaning they're all, they're coming with great power, great order, and great systematically destroying, right? The hooves of their horses seem like flint, and its chariot wheels like a whirlwind. That means they're fast and steady, right? Its roaring is like a lioness, and it roars like young lions. It growls as it seizes the prey and carries it off with no one to deliver. And it shall growl over it in that day like the roaring of the sea. If one looks to the land, behold, there is darkness and distress. Even the light is darkened by its clouds. So this is a picture of the Babylonians coming to destroy the city and take the people, destroy the nation, right? Now, we see there is a real break here. This is a real legitimate place to put a chapter, because although it's not in the original, but it is a break, because now he says, in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord. So he's giving a different vision, right? I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Okay, now, it's interesting. I can't say we know a lot. I mean, we know what seraphim are, right? And he's giving us a picture of seraphim. We know what cherubim are because they were over the ark. There was 2 cherubim on the ark, right? So there's different kinds of angels. But there's a lot about angels we don't know. One thing we do know is they're not like the angels that are portrayed in the world. They're not like that. These are powerful beings that are some, they can appear to look like men if they choose to, because they're spiritual beings, right? They can appear in that form, but they are actually spectacular creatures. Now, why did he cover his face and his feet? And I don't know. Perhaps they don't want Isaiah to see.
Yeah, it's the man can't see God without dying.
Right.
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 You think that could be maybe
Right.
why?
Yeah. And since they're in their actual form, perhaps that's the reason they're not appearing as men or whatever. Like when Daniel saw the angel, other people saw the angels. They usually fell on the floor.
Yeah.
And had no strength in them, right? But they were able to see them because they weren't necessarily appearing in their full glory.
Right, they could see angels, but
Yeah.
it says all throughout the Bible that even Moses wasn't allowed to, or Ezekiel, or not Ezekiel, Isaiah wasn't allowed to see God. God just
Oh no,
let
you
him
can't see his face. No, he saw,
Right.
right, the train
so
of
these
his...
angels are hiding God's face, right?
Right,
In God's
right,
feet.
right.
So maybe that's protecting.
Well, I think that's the picture, yeah. Now, did he actually see this in the temple? Perhaps, but it would imply that he was inside the temple, which, since he's not a priest, that's probably not. Okay?
Right, yeah.
He certainly wouldn't have been inside the holy place. So, but then again, he doesn't necessarily imply that, although you kind of get the feeling that since he saw his train filling the temple, right? But I think it's a vision, as I think, that he was taken up in a vision. He had a vision. This is what he saw, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And he saw the Lord in the temple, in the vision. Not necessarily in the temple. I could be wrong, but it doesn't say either way. I think the prophets kind of expect you to know that stuff. But to him it was real because he saw it. And it was real, but he was taken into the vision. In sort of the same way as Ezekiel was taken into the vision and saw the temple, and saw the restored temple. It's the same kind of thing.
In John and
Yeah,
Revelation.
yeah. When we get to Ezekiel, we'll see that too, that he was in Babylon, but he was taken into the new temple, and he was shown the way things were going to be. Right? Okay, so he saw the Lord, and he saw his holiness, right? But he didn't see his face, obviously. And he didn't see the angel's face either. And one called out to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the fountains of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. Okay? So we see, again, some of the things that we have learned over the years. Smoke, interesting. Clouds, the Lord comes with the clouds. Clouds are often part of God appearing. Smoke. There's a fire, Daniel says, flowing from the throne. Fire's, part of it. And here we have the angel takes a coal, right, and goes and puts it on his lips. So you get the whole picture of burning there, fire, right? So these are kind of things that we see throughout the Bible when it's speaking about the presence of God. But in this case, he's having a vision of all this in the temple. And the temple is shaking with the presence of God, and his train, meaning the train of his robe, is filling the whole temple. Right? So that gives you an idea. And again, it's a picture of how awesome God's glory. You're there, right? Now God does have a form. I mean, he's everywhere, but he is a person. And he has a form. But he is obviously way beyond us to understand. Right?
Yeah.
We get to know him. We know his... it's such an awesome thing that God wants us to know his heart and his feeling. I mean, what could be more exciting than that?
Yeah.
That the creator of the universe, the person who made everything, wants to know you personally. And you to know him. It's such an awesome thing. I mean, that's why I think to turn that down or to not enter into that when the offer is given to you, that's a serious, serious error. I mean, that's closing the door, I think. When you do that, if you don't know, it's one thing, but if you know that that's available to you and you don't pursue it, well, that's a problem. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we pursue it perfectly, obviously. We fall down, we get up again, but just to know the Lord, to know what he's thinking, what he's feeling, what he thinks about stuff. Talk to him like he's there with you. So what do you think about this? And before you even have the question out of your mouth, you'll know the answer, right? Because he's revealing it to you. So the Lord loves for us to know him and know his heart. And it's just such an amazing thing. But don't ever forget how incredibly awesome God is. That's the fear of the Lord, is the other side of the coin. Because he is holy. Amen?
Amen.
And you can't mess with that. You cannot treat that lightly. It's kind of like the picture, the fear of the Lord. It's kind of like a picture of the, I don't know how to put this in human terms, but it'll never do it justice, but you understand what I'm saying. It's like if you had the crown jewels. You know what the crown jewels are in England? Anybody know what the crown jewels are? They're the jewels on the crown. They're priceless. Can't imagine what they're worth in terms of monetary value. But, they're locked away. Nobody gets to mess with them, right? But just if they were brought out, if you like jewels, to me they probably wouldn't mean much. But if they're brought out, no matter whether you're a man or a woman, I think you'd be astonished looking at these things and what they're worth. And then if they were in your tribe, if you had to take them out and do something with them, you think you'd be very scared that something would happen. Now they're beautiful and you treasure them and they're awesome and you're so glad to be able to look at them and touch them, but you are very scared to drop them or let something happen to them, right? Or to have them stolen. So there's a fear element that goes with handling something that's very, very, very awesome and powerful. It's the same, and I know it's a very bad picture, but it's the same idea. It's not that we go around cringing in fear of God because He's mean.
Right.
He's not mean. It's because He's so holy that we have to be, very understanding of that and respectful, because, the light can just blow us away. It's very bright. Follow?
Yeah.
That's something the church has kind of lost. We have to carry that plus the Father's love. The two messages go together. We can't leave one. We can't be one without the other. Amen?
Amen.
And that's a good discernment tool with some of the prophets and the
Oh,
people
yeah.
out there now.
Yeah.
If they're not respecting and fearing the Lord and just make it sound like it's irreverent or
Yeah,
common,
right.
then I think that's a good filter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, be very careful. Yeah, today they're like people are. Oh, I have to be careful what I say, but
Yeah.
folks are treating God with like he's just the old grandfather inside the house, like
Yeah.
he's kind of
Common.
a nice guy,
Right.
There's no real reverence for His holiness or how awesome God is and how glorious He is. We know about it, but it's kind of not. It's like he's just so good and He's just so wonderful. And he's just kind of like your grandfather just sitting in there, And of course, a lot of that's true.
Right.
God is wonderful and He is our Father and we can climb up on His lap and all that, but He's got really big hands. And if they just fell on you, you could be dead. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. There's certain things you don't do and certain things you don't say.
Right.
There's a protocol.
Would you agree that it's maybe more proper to be more familiar with Jesus and more?
Well, that's where people start, but Jesus wants to bring us to the Father.
Right. So maybe we shouldn't treat Jesus more of a friend and God.
No, that's how we do when we're immature. We're just getting to know the Lord. That's okay when we're starting off, but
Right.
we need to get to know the Father. And if we know Jesus, we know the Father. So but we need to deal with this whole concept of fatherhood.
Yeah.
And get to know that that's what He's like. And He's an awesome Father, but he's also,
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is
holy.
we can see Jesus. People have seen Jesus' face.
Mm-hmm.
And, but God, that's to me that seems more reverent.
Right.
More unapproachable. We got to fear God.
Yeah.
More than, but I could be wrong. I'm asking. I'm not saying.
No, Jesus,
because
His glory. When John saw Him.
Yeah, I don't mean to say Jesus is
So-
less by any means, but I'm just saying.
No. But the point is well taken. But you don't take this stuff lightly.
Yeah.
And people going on about. A lot of people are saying they're seeing things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't know. Do people see angels? Yes. Do angels appear to people? Yes, they do. Can angels appear to any of us? Yes, they can. And we want them to.
Mm-hmm.
Amen?
Amen.
But a lot of people talk about seeing angels. And I think what they're seeing is something in the spirit, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But they don't tell you that. They act like it's right there. I see it. I've heard the craziest of stories.
I didn't mean to give
I
you
find
this.
that hard to handle
Yeah.
sometimes. Do I doubt that some people see them? No.
Right.
Paul saw all kinds of things, was taken into heaven, would appear on a regular basis.
But I don't think anybody
Right?
has seen God,
No, nobody's seen God, no.
And that's,
No,
you know,
nobody's
that's where
seen God.
That's another filtered
No,
thing.
absolutely.
Jesus maybe, angels
Yeah.
maybe, but God, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to get off on that.
No, I get your point, no. But seeing an angel, again, we don't want to make it so it's so impossible, because it happened all over the New Testament. And it happens, angels usually when they come to us,
Oh, yeah.
they come in a way that we can cope
Yeah.
and handle,
Yeah,
and not in their full glory, because we can't handle that,
right.
right? We can't handle that. Does it mean that it's bad because we can't handle it?
No.
No, it means that on our side is the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Our lack of purity means that I don't know how to describe this. It's like, you know, let's say you were, I know it's totally crazy, but let's say that you didn't breathe oxygen. Let's say you needed carbon dioxide instead of oxygen, like the trees and the plants, right? So if you were suddenly immersed in our environment, you die, because you don't have anything to breathe. It's kind of like that. We're going from our place into this pure holiness, perfection, and it's like we can't make that. You know, it's like coming in when they come from outer space in through Earth's atmosphere. Boom, they blow up. You know, because you can't. You're going from one dimension to another where it's perfection and power and awesomeness beyond anything we can comprehend. So God comes out of His place to meet with us. That's why the incarnation is such an incredible expression of God's love, that He comes in His Son to us and takes on our form, takes on our body, not just form, but body. Amen? And keeps it. And even the scars, as we heard Sunday.
Right.
How awesome is that? So, anyway, you get the picture though? It's not like, oh, you know, He's just going to hit you if you come near Him. It's not that. It's just that you'll be blown away by the holiness. And it's hard for us to grasp what holiness is. But God is so set apart and so different than us
Oh, yeah.
that, you know, the entry would just burn you up.
Yeah.
Right?
And He says that all day.
He says that all over,
Moses,
yeah.
you know,
So when
comes
He
out
comes, we can now, in Christ, we can go into the presence of the Father,
Amen.
into the Holy of Holies in heaven.
Amen.
But in the Spirit, not
Right.
the flesh. Now, there are people telling us that they can go to heaven anytime they want now. You can see them on TV telling us they go to heaven and they get directions and they come back and they do it.
Right.
Oh, there's one lady I saw one night on a certain show, which I wouldn't mention, but I just was flipping through the channels. Just, let me just look for a second here. I never watch Christian TV because it's just too upsetting to me. I can't watch it. I don't get blessed by it. I just get annoyed. Because they're either, But anyway, this lady was on there, and she's telling the host about, you know, how she goes up to heaven, and she hears these things and comes back and calls them into, you know, and she goes at will whenever she wants to go. And he's going on, and he's oohing and on, and my wife comes in the room, and she looks at the TV, and she says, "That woman's a witch." And she was a witch. Sure, she's a witch. That's witchcraft. She's not going to heaven. That's nonsense. You can't go to heaven at will. You can go in the Spirit, of course, by prayer, and through, you know, through the Holy Spirit, we can go directly through the blood of Christ into the presence of the Lord. But in the Spirit, not in the flesh, or not in a vision or rapture. We want to. You follow?
Yeah.
Those things are not something we can. And now what the church is doing is we have all these mystics who are actually teaching people that they can turn this on and off.
Yeah.
So they're bringing them into the occult. That's what they're doing. Turning it on and off. You don't turn that on and off. But can the Lord take you into a vision and you be in heaven? Yeah, He can. But you're not literally in heaven. You're just getting a vision of heaven.
Right.
Okay?
Kind of like the guy who got stung.
Yeah. But he actually went there.
Okay.
In the Spirit. His spirit went there. Because he died.
Right.
I'm talking about, we can't do that. Now, he actually went outside of his body.
Right.
Because he was dead. And he saw his body still, but he wasn't there.
Right.
Right? So that's a little different, but he didn't get, remember Jesus didn't let him see his face?
Right.
The witch saw his face.
The what?
The witch.
Yeah, well, yeah, she goes up there.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so,
That's
but
what
the
I'm
church is so hungry for power and miracles right now that they're buying into this stuff.
Yeah, a lot of good Christians.
Oh, I can tell you
that.
some of this stuff that would make your hair stand up. That these mystics are doing.
Mhm.
You know, it's crazy. There's a guy called John Crowder. Have you heard of him?
Called what?
Crowder is the name. John Crowder, not to be confused with another Crowder. Dave Crowder, who's not the same person. He and another fellow, the Hyper Grace guys, they go around and they teach people how to levitate and all this stuff.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And should be transported. They are transported all over the place. Yeah. Yep. And not a single one of that whole group will call him out or you know, tell everybody he's a heretic. They won't stand up and say it. It's just unbelievable. Some of the ministry, the places that guy goes.
They're proponents of the New World Order, right?
No, this is the
Dominionism and all that.
This guy's a flat out universalist.
Oh, okay.
This guy's,
Okay.
they call themselves the mystics.
Oh, yeah.
Another guy is Benjamin Dunn, who's written a book called The Happy Gospel. And with all these big names on it, you know. And their thing is, it's really weird. Okay? So the quest for miracles is opening up the wrong door.
Right.
Because they're just so desperate for this that they're not discerning that, hey, this isn't the way. You can't turn this on and off at will. Little Isaiah was taken up in this vision, but he didn't go, okay, I'm going to have another one tomorrow, you know.
Right.
He said, in the year of, you know, Uzziah, right? Anyway, sorry about that. We got a little off the track, but it's sort of important. Anyway, let's finish the verse here, this passage. And anyway, he said, when he had an expression, when he had a visitation, an experience of God's presence, what was the result? Then I said, woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Right? Now, he didn't literally see Jesus' face, or God's face, right? Or the angel's face, but he saw the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay? And it just, when you see the Lord, and you have an experience with the Lord, then you come into reality. Always. And a lot of people, Christians, have not come into reality because they haven't had any real experience of God. As soon as you have an experience with God, your eyes get opened up to reality. To what you're like, number one.
Yeah.
And what he's like.
Yeah.
And whoa. And Isaiah, who's a good man, by our standards, and by biblical standards, right? A righteous man suddenly realizes his mouth is messed up. And what's the result? The angel comes and shows mercy and puts the coal on his mouth. And the implication here is that it burns. And to get your mouth cleaned up, it's going to hurt, right? And he's among a people who are speaking things that are unclean, right? And of course, it's a picture of Isaiah's consecration to the Lord. He was a man of God prior to this, but he was being set apart here. Okay? And it also proves that in order to really minister to God's people, you have to come to grips with who you are.
Yeah.
And God will work in you to show you who you are and how much you need Him. Right? And to clean his lips so he can go in and give this word. And what's the conclusion? Then one of the seraphim flew, I have to hurry because my time is out, flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs, and he touched my mouth, and with it, and said, behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? See, he had to be consecrated first, right? And who will go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me. And then he tells them, you're going to go speak to a people who don't want to hear. They have unclean lips. They have hardened hearts. But you got to go anyway. Bring the word. So it's a great ministry message. But this is Isaiah's consecration really for his ministry. Amen? Which is really only beginning in this part here. All right, we're done for tonight.